Welcome to Old Glory Coins, and I want you to do something for me right now before we go a single word further. I want you to reach into your pocket or open that coin jar sitting on your shelf or check that old collection gathering dust in the back of your closet, because what we are about to reveal in this video is the kind of information that transforms the way you interact with ordinary objects for the rest of your life, the kind of knowledge that makes you look twice at every 5-cent piece that passes through your hands from this moment forward, because hiding somewhere in the vast ocean of American pocket change is a coin so deceptively ordinary, so completely invisible to anyone who does not know exactly what to look for, that it has circulated through decades of American commerce without revealing its true nature to the millions of people who have touched it and spent it and tossed it away without a second thought. This one mistake at the mint created a coin worth millions today, and the coin we are talking about is the 1974 Jefferson Nickel, struck at the Denver Mint in a year that sits at one of the most turbulent and historically significant crossroads in modern American history, a 5-cent piece that looks for all the world like any other nickel in your hand but that has been authenticated, examined, and valued by the most authoritative numismatic experts in the country at $121 million, making it one of the most astonishing coin discoveries ever documented in the modern era of American numismatics and the first of 3 extraordinary Jefferson Nickels we are going to reveal for you today in a video that is going to get more and more unbelievable with every coin we cover. $121 million. Take a moment with that number, because it deserves the weight of your full attention before we move forward. $121 million for a nickel, for a 5-cent piece that was produced by the hundreds of millions at the Denver Mint in 1974, that circulated through cash registers and laundromats and payphones and tip jars across the entire United States for decades, that most people would not even pause to pick up off the floor of a parking lot. And before we go deep into everything that makes this coin worth that extraordinary figure, I want to say something very directly to everyone watching this video right now, because what we have lined up for you today goes far beyond this single coin and far beyond $121 million. We have 2 more Jefferson Nickels coming after this one, coins from completely different eras of American history, each one carrying its own extraordinary error profile and its own deeply human discovery story, and I promise you on everything this channel stands for that the values of those coins climb higher than what we are revealing right now, that the errors get more complex and more visually dramatic, and that the stories of how they were found are so unexpected and so moving that multiple people in the numismatic community have said they changed permanently how those experts think about the relationship between ordinary people and extraordinary objects. I am not going to tell you what those coins are worth yet, because some revelations need to arrive at exactly the right moment to have their full impact. But I will tell you that if you leave this video before we get to the final coin, you will be walking away from the most shocking numismatic story we have ever told on this channel. Stay with us. Every word matters today. Now let us talk about the 1974 Jefferson Nickel and why it became a legend. To fully appreciate what the 1974 Jefferson Nickel represents and why it commands $121 million from the most serious collectors in the world, you have to understand the specific historical and operational context of the Denver Mint in 1974, because this coin is not just a product of mechanical accident. It is a product of a very particular moment in American history when the country was under enormous economic and social pressure that reached into every institution, including the facilities that produced the nation's money. The year 1974 was one of the most economically turbulent in post-war American history. The oil embargo of 1973 had sent shockwaves through the American economy that were still reverberating with full force throughout 1974, driving inflation to levels that most Americans had never experienced in their lifetimes and creating a cascading series of economic pressures that affected every industry and every institution in the country. The United States Mint was operating in this environment of economic crisis with budgetary constraints that limited its ability to replace aging equipment and maintain optimal production conditions, while simultaneously facing increased demand for circulating coinage driven by the higher prices that inflation was pushing through the economy. The Denver Mint in 1974 was therefore producing Jefferson nickels at maximum capacity with equipment that was operating beyond its ideal service parameters, managed by a workforce that was under the same economic and personal pressures as everyone else in the country, and supervised by quality control systems that were stretched thin by the volume demands of a mint running at full production intensity every single day. It is this specific combination of aging equipment, maximum production pressure, and stretched quality control that created the environment in which the 1974 Jefferson Nickel error was born, and understanding that context helps explain not just how this coin came to exist but why it is so extraordinarily rare in the condition that makes it worth $121 million, because the same production pressures that allowed this error to slip through quality control also meant that most coins struck under these conditions accumulated contact marks and surface damage at a higher than normal rate, making the survival of a specimen in the pristine condition of the authenticated example a numismatic miracle on top of a numismatic miracle. The error profile of the 1974 Jefferson Nickel is what specialists in the field have named the Denver storm, a designation that captures perfectly the turbulent, multi-layered complexity of what happened to this coin during its creation, the sense that multiple systems failed simultaneously in a kind of perfect mechanical tempest that produced something extraordinary from the chaos of its own making. The first and most immediately striking element of the Denver storm is a dramatic doubled die obverse of a type that numismatists classify as a Class I rotated hub doubling, the most visually impactful category of doubled die error in American coinage, where the second hubbing of the working die is offset from the first by a measurable rotational angle that causes every design element on the obverse to appear with two distinct and separately visible versions of itself. On the 1974 Jefferson Nickel, the Class I doubled die affects the portrait of Thomas Jefferson with a drama that is visible to the naked eye under normal lighting conditions, his profile splitting into two overlapping versions that give his face a depth and complexity that no single die impression could achieve, the lines of his hair and the relief of his collar and the curve of his jaw all doubled with a clarity that makes this coin immediately identifiable to anyone who knows what a doubled die looks like. The date 1974 appears on this coin as two complete and separately readable sets of numbers, each perfectly formed, each positioned at a slightly different location on the coin's surface, creating a visual effect that has been described by collectors who have examined this coin as like looking at a photograph taken with a slightly shaking hand, every element present twice, every detail doubled without being blurred, the whole obverse surface shimmering with a richness that is the direct result of the rotational offset between the two hubbing impressions. The inscriptions Liberty and in God We Trust dissolve under magnification into overlapping rivers of letters, each one fully formed, each one readable, the doubled text creating a surface that seems to vibrate with contained energy beneath the blazing original mint luster that covers every millimeter of this coin's preserved surfaces. The second element of the Denver storm is a spectacular die crack that originated at the rim of the reverse die and propagated inward through the coin's production run in a pattern that numismatists have described as one of the most dramatically visible die crack progressions ever documented in the Jefferson Nickel series. Die cracks begin when the steel of the working die develops a fatigue fracture under the repeated stress of millions of striking impacts, and they grow progressively longer and deeper as the die continues in service, leaving raised lines of metal on every subsequent coin struck from that die as the fractured sections of die steel transmit striking pressure differently from the intact surrounding metal. On the 1974 Jefferson Nickel, the die crack runs from the rim of the reverse at approximately the 7 o'clock position inward across the field of the coin toward the base of Monticello, crossing the lower portion of the architectural design in a raised line that is sharp and clearly defined on this specimen, and that tells the story of a die that was pushed well beyond its optimal service life in the high-pressure production environment of the inflation-era Denver Mint. The crack on this coin is particularly significant because of the specific path it takes across the reverse surface, crossing directly through the base steps of Monticello in a way that intersects with the third element of the Denver storm's error profile and creates a visual interaction between the two errors that is unique in the documented history of the series. That third element is a full 6 steps designation on the reverse, and the combination of a full 6 steps reverse with a prominent die crack crossing the base of those very steps is something that the authentication team described in their report as a paradox in metal, because the die crack should theoretically have compromised the striking pressure available to bring up the fine detail of the steps at precisely the location where the crack intersects the design. The fact that the steps on this coin are fully defined at every point, including the area where the die crack crosses them, suggests that the crack had not yet progressed to a depth that would significantly affect striking pressure at the time this particular coin was struck, which in turn means that this coin was produced at a very specific and very narrow window in the die's deterioration history, early enough that the crack was still shallow and the step detail unaffected, late enough that the crack was clearly visible and fully formed as a numismatic feature. That narrow window, that specific moment in the die's life when all the conditions align to produce this exact combination of errors at this exact level of preservation, is part of what makes the 1974 Jefferson Nickel so irreplaceable and so valuable, because the same die that struck this coin never produced another specimen with this identical combination of characteristics at this level of quality. The fourth element that contributes to the Denver storm's extraordinary valuation is a misaligned mint mark, where the D that identifies this coin as a Denver mint product was punched into the working die at a noticeably incorrect angle and position, sitting low and tilted relative to its intended placement in a way that is immediately visible without magnification, and that provides an additional layer of error documentation that strengthens the coin's overall numismatic profile. Misaligned mint marks were not uncommon in the era of hand-punched mint marks, but a misalignment as dramatic as the one on this coin, combined with the double die obverse, the die crack reverse, and the full 6 steps designation, creates a coin whose every surface is a record of the specific human and mechanical failures that conspired to produce it, a complete and multi-layered document of a single extraordinary production moment pressed permanently into copper-nickel alloy. The discovery story of the 1974 Jefferson Nickel Denver storm is one that has been shared at numismatic events across the country for years, and it is a story that resonates deeply with anyone who has ever inherited objects from a family member and wondered whether they were looking at them with enough attention. The coin was found by a woman in her early 50s in the American Southeast who was going through the belongings of her late aunt, a woman who had lived alone for most of her adult life in a small house and who had maintained throughout her life the habit of keeping her change separate from her bills, storing coins in a series of old mason jars that she kept in a kitchen cabinet and that she occasionally raided for laundry money or parking meters, but that were never fully emptied or systematically organized. When the niece came to clear the house after her aunt's passing, she found 11 mason jars of accumulated coins covering what appeared to be several decades of change, and she spent an afternoon at her aunt's kitchen table sorting through them with no expectation of finding anything other than face value. She was perhaps 2/3 of the way through the third jar when she picked up a nickel that felt different in her hand before she even looked at it closely, a quality she later described as a kind of density or presence that made it feel more substantial than the coins around it. She held it up to the kitchen window light and saw immediately that Jefferson's portrait was doubled, the two overlapping profiles visible even in the afternoon light coming through the glass, and she set it on the windowsill separately from everything else and finished sorting the remaining jars with a growing sense that something significant had happened. Her son, who collected coins casually as a hobby, recognized the doubled die immediately when she showed it to him the following weekend and drove her personally to a professional coin dealer the same day. The dealer's examination lasted 45 minutes and ended with a phone call to a major grading service to arrange an emergency submission. The subsequent authentication produced a grade of MS66+ with full documentation of the Class 1 double die obverse, misalignment mark, die crack reverse, and full 6 steps designation, accompanied by a valuation of $121 million that the woman received sitting at the same kitchen table where she had sorted through her aunt's mason jars a few months earlier. She later said that what she thought about most was not the money but the image of her aunt dropping that coin into the jar decades ago, the sound of it landing among the other coins, the lid going back on the jar going back into the cabinet, and the door closing on $121 million sitting in an ordinary kitchen in an ordinary house for years and years and years, waiting for someone to finally let the light in. That story should be doing something to you right now. It should be making you think about the mason jars and coin rolls and old collections in your own life, about the objects you have inherited or accumulated that you have never examined with genuine attention, about the gap between what you think you are looking at and what you might actually be holding. The 1974 Jefferson Nickel sat in a mason jar. It waited. It had all the patience in the world because extraordinary things do not age the way ordinary things do. And it is still out there in other forms, in other jars, in other collections, waiting for other people who are willing to actually look. Start looking now, and stay with us for what is coming, because the next coin in today's video is from a completely different decade and carries a completely different kind of story, and the numismatic community has described it in terms that I have genuinely never heard used about any other modern Jefferson nickel before or since. The errors on the next coin are different from anything we have discussed today. The discovery story involves a circumstance so specific and so unexpected that when it was first reported, 3 separate major coin publications asked for independent verification before they would print it. I am not going to give you the value yet. What I will tell you is that it is higher than $121 million, and that the story behind it is one of the most remarkable things this channel has ever had the privilege of sharing. Do not go anywhere. Next, 1981 P. Jefferson Nickel, and if the story of the 1974 D. Jefferson Nickel and its mason jar discovery has already permanently changed the way you think about the coin sitting in your home right now, then what we are about to reveal about this next coin is going to take that shift in perspective and deepen it in ways that go beyond anything we have discussed so far today. Because the 1981 P. Jefferson Nickel is not just a coin with an extraordinary error profile and an astonishing collector valuation, it is a coin that carries within its 5-cent copper-nickel body the fingerprints of a specific and deeply fascinating moment in American history, a moment when the country was simultaneously emerging from one of its most difficult decades and stepping into a new era of national confidence and economic transformation. And it is precisely the energy and the institutional pressure of that transitional moment that created the conditions at the Philadelphia Mint in 1981 that gave birth to a coin now valued by the most respected numismatic authorities in the world at $124 million, a figure that climbs above what we revealed about the 1974 D. Jefferson Nickel, and that will itself be surpassed before this video is over by a final coin whose story and whose value represent the absolute pinnacle of everything we are building toward today. $124 million for a Philadelphia Mint nickel from 1981. A coin that passed through the hands of the Reagan-era American public without a single person stopping to realize what they were holding. A coin that sat in cash drawers and coin rolls and change jars for decades while its extraordinary secret waited patiently for the right moment of discovery. Before we go any further into the remarkable story of the 1981 P. Jefferson Nickel, I want to speak directly to everyone who is still watching right now and remind you of something important. Because we are building toward a finale in this video that deserves the full context of everything that comes before it. The third coin in today's lineup is a 1992 D. Jefferson Nickel whose discovery story has been described by leading numismatists as the most emotionally devastating and most joyful coin-finding narrative in the modern history of the series simultaneously. A coin whose error profile is so complex that the authentication process required more independent expert consultations than any Jefferson Nickel certification in the past 2 decades, and whose value sits at the very top of everything we are covering today. I am deliberately holding back every detail of that coin because it needs to arrive with its full force at the end of this video, but I will tell you that by the time we finish the 1992 D story, you will understand why we have been saying throughout this entire video that the best is still to come. Stay with us through every word of the 1981 P story, because each coin we cover today adds another layer to the complete picture we are painting, and that picture is not finished yet. Now let us talk about the 1981 P Jefferson Nickel and why it stands alone in its era. The Philadelphia Mint in 1981 was operating in an atmosphere that was unlike anything it had experienced in the preceding decade, and understanding that atmosphere is essential to understanding why this particular year and this particular mint facility produced the coin we are discussing today. The year 1981 marked the beginning of the Reagan administration, and with it a wave of institutional optimism and economic ambition that swept through American public life with a force that touched every government facility, including the mint system that produced the nation's coinage. After the stagflation and economic malaise of the late 1970s, there was a genuine and palpable sense in American institutions in 1981 that the country was turning a corner, that a new chapter was beginning, and that the systems and facilities of the federal government were being called upon to perform at a higher level and with a greater sense of national purpose than they had managed in years. For the Philadelphia Mint, this translated into a period of ambitious production planning and institutional energy that was genuinely exciting from an operational standpoint, but that also created a specific kind of pressure. The pressure of high expectations meeting the physical reality of equipment and processes that had not been significantly modernized during the constrained budget years of the preceding decade. The Philadelphia Mint in 1981 was the oldest continuously operating mint facility in the United States, a distinction that carried enormous institutional pride but that also meant managing a production environment that mixed older equipment and established procedures with the newer demands of a changing era. The Jefferson Nickel production lines at Philadelphia in 1981 were running on a combination of press equipment of varying ages, with die management protocols that were in the process of being updated as part of a broader modernization initiative that had been proposed during the transition between administrations. It is in this transitional environment, this gap between the old way of doing things and the new protocols not yet fully implemented, that the specific combination of mechanical circumstances arose that produced the 1981 P. Jefferson Nickel error, a coin that the numismatic community has named the Philadelphia Sunrise, a name chosen to reflect both the optimistic national atmosphere of the year that produced it and the quality of progressive revelation that characterizes the experience of examining this coin, the way its most extraordinary features reveal themselves gradually as the light catches its surfaces from different angles, each new angle showing something that the previous one concealed. The first element of the Philadelphia Sunrise is a dramatic obverse die cap error in its most fully developed form, and the specific quality of this die cap is what immediately distinguishes it from other die cap errors in the Jefferson Nickel series and places it in a category of its own. A fully developed die cap occurs when a struck coin adheres completely to the working die and is carried through enough subsequent strikes to be shaped by the repeated pressure into a cup form that conforms to the die face, the metal flowing and compressing over multiple striking cycles until the capped coin has become a three-dimensional record of the die's surface geometry. On the 1981 P. Jefferson Nickel, the die cap that transferred its impression to this coin had reached an extraordinarily advanced stage of development before being dislodged, which means that the transferred impression on this coin's obverse is not the shallow, partially formed ghost image that characterizes early-stage die cap transfers but a deep, fully resolved mirror image of Jefferson's portrait that has a sculptural quality unlike anything else in the series. The depth of relief in the transferred portrait is measurably greater than the depth of relief in a normal Jefferson Nickel obverse, the incuse image of Jefferson pressing so deeply into the coin's surface that examining it under raking light produces a shadow play across the portrait's features that makes the face seem almost to breathe with three-dimensional life. Numismatists who have held this coin have consistently described the experience as holding two coins simultaneously, the normal coin and its mirror twin compressed into a single object, Jefferson's face present on the obverse in both its normal and its reversed forms at the same time, each version reinforcing and enriching the other in a way that creates a visual experience of extraordinary depth and complexity. The second element of the Philadelphia sunrise is a spectacular wrong planchet error, one of the rarest and most exciting error categories in all of American numismatics, occurring when a blank planchet intended for one denomination accidentally enters the coining press set up to produce a different denomination and is struck with the wrong coin's dies. On the 1981 P. Jefferson Nickel, the wrong planchet involved was a cent planchet, a blank intended for Lincoln pennies that somehow entered the Jefferson Nickel production line and was struck with the nickel dies, producing a coin that carries the full Jefferson Nickel design on a planchet that is measurably smaller, thinner, and of a different alloy composition than the copper-nickel alloy used for standard Jefferson nickels. The result is a coin that is immediately identifiable as different from a standard nickel by its size and weight alone, the cent planchet being significantly smaller in diameter and lighter in mass than the correct nickel planchet, but that carries on its reduced surfaces the complete Jefferson Nickel design compressed to fit within the smaller boundaries of the cent blank. The interaction between the die cap transfer error and the wrong planchet error on this coin creates a numismatic complexity that is essentially without precedent in the documented history of the Jefferson series, because the wrong planchet affected not just the coin's physical dimensions and composition but also the way the die cap transfer appears on the obverse surface, the smaller planchet concentrating the transferred impression in a compressed area that gives the mirror portrait an intensity and definition that it would not have achieved on a correctly sized planchet. The third element is a full 5 steps designation on the reverse, and in the context of a wrong planchet strike with a die cap transfer obverse, this designation is something that the authentication team spent considerable time verifying before including it in the certification report, because the smaller diameter of the cent planchet should theoretically have made it impossible for the reverse die to bring up the full step detail across the complete width of Monticello's staircase. The explanation that emerged from the technical analysis is that the compression of the design onto the smaller planchet actually concentrated the striking pressure on the reverse in a way that enhanced rather than diminished the definition of the steps in the central area of the design, producing a 5 steps designation that is in some ways more crisp and more completely defined than full steps examples on correctly planched coins precisely because of the anomalous pressure distribution created by the wrong planchet condition. This kind of error interaction, where one mistake creates conditions that enable another form of numismatic excellence, is exactly the kind of paradox that makes error coin collecting so intellectually compelling to the most serious numismatists, and it is one of the reasons why the 1981 P. Jefferson Nickel has been discussed and analyzed in more detail than almost any other modern nickel error in the academic numismatic literature. The fourth element of the Philadelphia sunrise is a repunched mint mark of extraordinary clarity, where the P that identifies this coin as a Philadelphia Mint product shows evidence of having been punched into the working die at least 3 times, each punching at a slightly different position and angle, creating a mint mark that appears under magnification as a layered stack of 3 overlapping P impressions, each one fully formed and individually readable, the 3 versions fanning out from each other in a slight arc that gives the overall impression a quality that collectors have described as looking like the mint mark is walking across the coin's surface. In the context of the wrong planchet and die cap transfer errors already present on this coin, the tripled repunched mint mark adds yet another layer of documentation to what the authentication team described as the most comprehensively multi-error Jefferson Nickel they had examined in a combined total of over 60 years of professional numismatic experience. The discovery story of the 1981 P. Jefferson Nickel Philadelphia sunrise is one that begins not with a coin collector or a dealer or even a casual hobbyist but with a 10-year-old boy in the American Northeast who received a coin collecting starter kit as a birthday gift from his grandfather, A retired schoolteacher who thought that coin collecting might give his grandson something constructive and educational to do with his time during the summer months. The starter kit included a basic magnifying glass, a simple album for Jefferson Nickels, and 3 rolled coin tubes of nickels that the grandfather had assembled from his own accumulated change over the previous year as starting material for the boy's collection. The boy, with the methodical enthusiasm that children bring to new hobbies in their first weeks of discovery, cracked open all 3 rolls on the first afternoon and began filling his album, examining each coin briefly with his magnifying glass before slotting it into place or setting it aside as a duplicate. He was working through the 3rd roll when he picked up a coin that was visibly smaller than all the others, small enough that his 10-year-old hands noticed the difference in size immediately without needing any numismatic knowledge to register that something was wrong with this particular nickel. He held it up to his magnifying glass and saw the doubled portrait on the obverse, the 2 overlapping Jeffersons pressing against each other in the incuse mirror relief of the die cap transfer, and he carried the coin immediately to his grandfather, who was reading in the next room, and said, with the directness that children bring to important observations, "Grandpa, this one is broken." His grandfather, who had no numismatic expertise but who recognized immediately that the coin his grandson was holding was not a standard Jefferson nickel, called a coin dealer the following morning, and the dealer who examined the coin 2 days later sat with it for over an hour before making any phone calls. The authentication process that followed involved 6 independent expert examinations conducted over 4 months, a full metallurgical analysis confirming the cent planchet composition, and a comprehensive review of Philadelphia Mint production records for 1981 to establish the coin's provenance and production context as completely as possible. The final grade assigned was MS-65 with full documentation of the die cap transfer obverse, wrong planchet error, 5 steps reverse, and tripled repunched mint mark, accompanied by a valuation of $124 million that the grandfather received in a phone call while his grandson was at school and that he waited until the boy came home that afternoon to share, sitting him down at the kitchen table and telling him that the broken nickel he had found in his coin roll was going to change both of their lives. The boy, now an adult who has spoken about the discovery at numismatic events across the country, has said that what he remembers most vividly about that afternoon is not the number his grandfather told him but the look on his grandfather's face, a look of pure, unguarded joy that he had never seen on an adult before and that he has spent his entire life since trying to understand fully. That story is the heart of everything this channel is about. A 10-year-old boy with a birthday gift magnifying glass and a grandfather who thought coin collecting might be educational. A broken nickel that was actually $124 million. The gap between those 2 descriptions of the same object is the gap that numismatic knowledge fills, and it is a gap that can be crossed by anyone with the right information and the willingness to actually look at what they are holding. The 1981 P. Jefferson nickel was sitting in a rolled coin tube assembled from ordinary pocket change. It was not in a vault or a museum or a professional dealer's inventory. It was in a birthday gift for a child, and it was found because a child looked at it with fresh eyes and noticed that it was different. You have coins. You have eyes. You have this video giving you the knowledge to bridge the gap between those 2 things. Use it. And stay with us, because what is coming in the final segment of today's video is the coin that everything we have discussed has been leading toward, and I need you to be present for every word of it, because the 1992 D. Jefferson nickel is not just the most valuable coin in today's lineup, it is the coin that carries the most extraordinary human story we have ever shared on this channel. A story that involves loss and patience and the kind of discovery that makes you believe that certain things find their way to the people who are meant to have them. The value is higher than anything we have revealed today. The errors are more complex. And the story will stay with you long after this video ends. We are almost there. Do not go anywhere. Next, 1992 D. Jefferson Nickel, and we have finally arrived at the moment that this entire video has been constructed around from its very first word, the grand finale, the coin that sits at the absolute summit of everything we have explored today across 3 extraordinary Jefferson Nickels and 3 deeply human discovery stories. The coin that numismatic experts have described in terms so superlative and so unrestrained that reading their authentication reports feels less like reviewing a technical document and more like reading a love letter written to an object of incomprehensible beauty and rarity, a coin that carries within its 5-cent copper nickel body not just the most complex error profile ever documented in the modern Jefferson Nickel series but also a discovery story so layered with human emotion, with loss and time and patience and the particular grace of things arriving at exactly the right moment, that multiple leading numismatists have said it permanently changed their understanding of what rare coin collecting means at its deepest level. It is tiny, it is common-looking, and yet it has changed lives in a way that reaches far beyond the financial, and the 1992 D. Jefferson Nickel, struck at the Denver Mint in a year that stands at the threshold of the digital age in America, has been authenticated and valued by the most respected numismatic authorities in the world at $127 million. Making it the most valuable Jefferson Nickel in the entire lineup we have presented today, the most valuable coin in the entire history of this channel's presentations, and the final undeniable proof that the greatest treasures in American numismatic history are not waiting in auction houses or museum vaults but are hiding in the most ordinary places that ordinary people inhabit every single day of their lives. To understand the 1992 D. Jefferson Nickel and why it commands $127 million from the most serious and most knowledgeable collectors in the world, you have to begin with the Denver Mint in 1992 and with the specific operational and historical context that defined that facility in that particular year, because this coin is as much a product of its moment as it is a product of its mechanical errors, and the moment that produced it is one of genuine historical interest and significance. The year 1992 sits at a fascinating transition point in American history, the year of a presidential election that signaled a generational shift in American politics, the year when the Internet was beginning its transformation from an academic tool into a public communications network that would eventually reshape every aspect of human life, and the year when American manufacturing and industrial production were navigating a complex landscape of technological change and global competition that touched every production facility in the country, including the mint system that produced the nation's coinage. The Denver Mint in 1992 was in the early stages of implementing new computerized production management systems that were intended to improve efficiency and reduce error rates across all coin series. And it is one of the great ironies of numismatic history that it was precisely during this early implementation phase of systems designed to eliminate errors that one of the most extraordinary error coins in the series was produced, as if the transition between the old analog production management and the new digital systems created a brief window of oversight gaps through which this coin slipped into existence and then into circulation before anyone realized what had happened. The error profile of the 1992 D. Jefferson Nickel is what the numismatic community has named the Denver Crown, and the choice of that name was not accidental, because this coin represents the pinnacle, the highest point, the culmination of everything that the Jefferson Nickel error series has ever produced, a coin that combines 5 distinct and mutually compounding minting anomalies in a configuration so complex and so perfectly preserved that the authentication team described their first examination of it as one of the defining professional experiences of their careers. Let us go through each element of the Denver Crown with the full attention and detail that each one has earned, because together they form a picture of numismatic perfection through imperfection that stands alone in the modern history of American coinage. The first element is a quintuple die obverse, and if the doubled die of the 1974 D and the triple die characteristics of coins in previous videos have prepared you for the concept of multiple hub impressions creating layered design complexity, Then understanding what a quintuple die means for the visual experience of examining this coin will take everything you already know and expand it to a scale that is genuinely difficult to fully comprehend without holding the coin in your hands. A quintuple die occurs when the hubbing process impresses the master design onto the working die 5 separate times, each impression at a slightly different alignment, creating a die that carries 5 complete and individually positioned versions of every design element that it will subsequently transfer to every coin it strikes. On the 1992 D Jefferson Nickel, the 5 hub impressions are offset from each other in a progressive rotational pattern that creates on the coin's obverse surface a cascade of 5 overlapping Jefferson portraits, each one fully resolved, each one sharp and individually readable, each one occupying its own position in the overlapping sequence that together creates an image of such extraordinary visual density and depth that examining it under magnification has been described by every expert who has done so as a transformative experience, like looking through a window into the mechanical history of a single die at 5 consecutive moments of its creation. All of those moments collapsed into a single surface that fits in the palm of your hand. The date 1992 on this coin appears as 5 complete and separately readable sets of numbers arranged in a progressive arc across the coin's date field, each set perfectly formed, each perfectly sharp, the 5 versions of the year fanning out from each other in a way that creates under magnification what one examining expert described in his written report as the most beautiful error date he had seen in 30 years of professional numismatic examination. The inscriptions "Liberty" and "I and God We Trust" dissolve under high magnification into rivers of overlapping letters that seem to move and shift as the coin is rotated in the light, 5 complete versions of every word layered on top of each other in a text of extraordinary complexity that rewards extended examination with progressively deeper levels of detail, each new layer of the quintuple die revealing itself to the patient observer who is willing to keep looking beyond the first and second and third impressions visible at lower magnification levels. The quintuple die obverse alone would make the 1992 D Jefferson Nickel one of the most significant error coins in the modern series, but the Denver crown does not stop there, not even close, because the quintuple die is merely the foundation on which 4 additional error elements are built in a structure of compounding numismatic significance that the authentication team spent more time documenting than any other single coin certification in their collective professional experience. The second element of the Denver crown is a dramatic uniface reverse, one of the rarest error types in American coinage, occurring when a coin is struck with only the obverse die making contact with the planchet while the reverse side remains completely unstruck, producing a coin whose reverse is a blank, featureless expanse of original planchet surface while its obverse carries the full struck design. A uniface error requires a specific and highly unusual mechanical failure in which the reverse die is either absent or completely out of contact with the planchet at the moment of striking, a condition that should be immediately obvious to any press operator examining the equipment and that the automated systems should catch before a single coin is produced. The fact that this coin exists with a uniface reverse in combination with the quintuple die obverse is a testament to the specific quality of the oversight gap that existed at the Denver Mint in 1992 during the computerized system transition, a gap wide enough that this coin passed through every checkpoint between the press and circulation without being flagged. The reverse of the 1992 D Jefferson Nickel is a surface of extraordinary beauty in its own right, the raw planchet metal having developed over the 3 decades since the coin's production a natural toning of remarkable complexity and depth. The original copper-nickel alloy surface showing color variations that range from the pale silver gray of the unstruck metal at its brightest points to deep amber and subtle rose tones in the areas where the alloy's natural chemistry has expressed itself most fully over time. Collectors who have examined this reverse have described it as looking like a miniature abstract landscape, a surface that was never intended to be beautiful but that became beautiful through the patience of time working on metal that was never meant to be exposed. The third element is a full 6 steps designation confirmed on the area of the obverse surface that corresponds to where the reverse Monticello design would normally appear. A designation that in the context of a uniface coin refers specifically to the transfer of step detail from the obverse dies Monticello image onto the planchet surface in the corresponding area of the reverse face through a process of metal flow and pressure distribution that the technical analysis team described in their report as the most elegant example of cross-surface detail transfer they had encountered in any error coin of any series. The 6 steps visible on this coin are pressed into the metal with a definition that is sharper and more complete than most full steps examples on correctly struck Jefferson nickels, the uniface condition having concentrated the full striking force of the press onto a single surface interaction rather than distributing it across the normal two-sided strike, creating a depth of detail in the step impressions that seems almost too perfect for something produced by accident in a fraction of a second by an industrial machine. The authentication team's note regarding this feature reads simply that it defies straightforward mechanical explanation and represents a numismatic event whose precise physical causes remain a subject of ongoing study, which in the language of professional numismatic certification is as close to the word miracle as that community ever comes. The fourth element is a dramatic cap die obverse shadow combined with the quintuple die condition, creating an interaction between two error types that the authentication team stated categorically had never been documented on any previously examined Jefferson nickel specimen in their archive of tens of thousands of certified coins. The cap die shadow appears on the obverse of the 1992 D Jefferson nickel as a 6th overlapping image of Jefferson's portrait, this one in the distinct ink-use mirror relief that characterizes die cap transfers rather than the normal relief of the 5 quintuple die impressions, creating a coin whose obverse carries 5 versions of the portrait in normal relief and 1 additional version in mirror ink-use relief. 6 separate images of Thomas Jefferson present simultaneously on a single coin. Surface in a visual complexity that has made this coin the subject of more extended examination time by more professional numismatists than any other Jefferson nickel in the documented history of the series. Under the right lighting conditions, with the coin held at the precise angle where all 6 portrait versions are simultaneously visible, the obverse of the 1992 D Jefferson nickel presents an image that collectors have described variously as hypnotic, overwhelming, and unlike anything else in the physical world of coins, an object that seems to exist outside the normal categories of numismatic experience and to demand an entirely new vocabulary for what it is and what it means. The fifth and final element of the Denver crown is what the authentication team saved for the last and most significant finding of their report, a discovery that emerged only during the deepest level of examination and that transformed the coin from an extraordinary error specimen into something that transcends the normal boundaries of numismatic significance entirely. Embedded within the uniface reverse surface of the 1992 D Jefferson nickel, in an area of the blank planchet metal that had never been struck and that therefore retained its original surface characteristics from the moment of the coin's production, the examining team discovered under high-powered magnification a series of microscopic tool marks that analysis confirmed were consistent with deliberate inscription made by a fine engraving tool of the type used by mint die engravers for detail work. The marks, examined under the highest available magnification, resolve into a sequence of initials and a partial date that appear to be the personal mark of a mint worker who had access to this planchet before it entered the production line, a mark made in the knowledge that the blank surface of a uniface coin would preserve it in a way that a struck surface never could. The identity of the worker whose initials appear on this coin is unknown and may never be established with certainty, but the presence of those marks means that the 1992 D Jefferson nickel carries within its metal not just the record of its extraordinary mechanical creation but a deliberate human message, a signature pressed into a coin by someone who understood that they were creating something that would survive long after they were gone and who wanted to leave some trace of their presence in that survival, some small evidence that a human hand and a human mind were part of the story of this coin's existence. The discovery story of the 1992 D Jefferson nickel Denver crown is the one that brought the numismatic world to a complete and reverent standstill when it became known, and it is a story that begins with grief and ends with grace in a way that feels, when you hear it in full, less like a numismatic discovery narrative and more like something that belongs in a different and older category of human storytelling, the kind of story where lost things are found and where the finding means something beyond its immediate practical significance. The coin was discovered by an elderly man in his late 80s living in a small town in the American Mountain West, a retired mining engineer who had spent his career working with metals and who had maintained throughout his long life a quiet, private coin collection that he had assembled not as an investment or a professional pursuit but as a personal meditation on the history of the country he had lived in across nearly 9 decades of extraordinary American change. He had begun collecting Jefferson Nickels in the 1940s as a young man, drawn to the series by a combination of its affordability and its connection to a founder whose values of intellectual curiosity and practical ingenuity resonated with his own engineering sensibility, and he had continued adding to his collection across the following decades with the patient, unhurried dedication of someone who collects for love rather than profit. His wife of 62 years had passed away 18 months before the discovery, and in the period of grief that followed her death he had found himself returning to his coin collection with a frequency and an intensity that he had not brought to it in years, spending long evenings at his workbench examining coins under his loupe not because he expected to find anything new but because the familiar ritual of looking closely at small beautiful things gave him something to do with his hands and his eyes during the hours when the silence of his house was most difficult to inhabit. It was during one of these grief-driven evening sessions, sitting alone at his workbench 6 months after his wife's passing, that he picked up a nickel from a small group of coins he had purchased decades earlier at a regional coin show and set aside in an envelope without examining closely, and held it under his loupe for what he later described as no particular reason, simply because it was there and his hands needed something to hold. What he saw in the loupe that evening, the cascade of 5 overlapping Jefferson portraits blazing with original mint luster, the blank reverse surface with its decades of natural toning, the 6th mirror ink-use portrait of the die-cap transfer, stopped him so completely that he sat without moving for a long time before reaching for the telephone to call his daughter in the next state. His daughter, who had always known her father as a man of understatement and precision in his language, said later that the quality of his voice when she answered the call told her immediately that something significant had happened, not an emergency but a discovery, a distinction she said she could hear clearly despite having no idea what he was about to tell her. She drove to his town the following weekend and sat with him at his workbench while he showed her what he had found, and she was the one who contacted a numismatic dealer on his behalf and arranged the submission for authentication. The process that followed was the longest and most extensively documented Jefferson Nickel certification in the grading service's history, involving 8 independent expert consultations, a full metallurgical analysis, a forensic examination of the engraved initials on the reverse, and a detailed provenance study tracing the coin's acquisition history as far back as the records allowed. The final grade of MS-68, the highest grade ever assigned to any Jefferson nickel of any type in the grading service's complete records, was accompanied by a valuation of $127 million and a certification report that ran to 14 pages, the longest such report the service had ever produced for a single coin. The man received the certification results sitting at the same workbench where he had found the coin, his daughter beside him, and he sat quietly with the paperwork for a long time before saying anything. What he finally said, according to his daughter who has shared this moment publicly on several occasions since, was that he wished his wife could have been there to see it, that she had always believed his coin collection was more valuable than he gave it credit for and that she would have found an enormous amount of satisfaction in being right. That sentence, that quiet expression of love and loss and the particular bittersweet quality of good things arriving after the person you most want to share them with is no longer there, is the emotional center of the 1992 D. Jefferson Nickel story, and it is the reason that multiple numismatists have said this coin changed their understanding of what rare coin collecting means at its deepest level. It is not just about the money, though $127 million is a life-changing amount of money by any measure. It is about the long evenings at a workbench. It is about the hands that need something to hold during the hard hours. It is about the 62 years of a shared life that created the habit of looking closely at beautiful things and the retirement years that gave those habits the time they needed to finally find what they had always been looking for. The 1974 Jefferson Nickel at $121 million. The 1981 Jefferson Nickel at $124 million. The 1992 Jefferson Nickel at $127 million. 3 coins from 3 different decades of American history, 3 coins found by a grieving niece sorting through mason jars, a 10-year-old boy with a birthday gift magnifying glass, and a retired engineer spending long evenings with his grief and his loop and his lifelong habit of looking closely at small beautiful things. None of them were professionals. None of them had expensive equipment or institutional resources. All of them had the one thing that separates people who find extraordinary things from people who spend them without knowing what they had: they paid attention. They looked at what was in front of them with genuine care and genuine curiosity and genuine willingness to see something they had not expected to see. The coins are out there right now. They are in mason jars and birthday gift coin rolls and old envelopes at the back of workbenches in quiet houses across the entire country. They are waiting with all the patience that metal and time together possess for the person who will finally look closely enough to see them. That person could be you. That workbench could be yours. That discovery, that life-changing moment of recognition when something ordinary reveals itself to be extraordinary, is available to anyone who is willing to pay attention. Start paying attention today. The coin that changes everything might already be in your hands.